He was 18 years old, with nothing but a state-issued duffel bag and a key to a place he'd never seen. What he discovered inside that rusty metal hut wasn't just a home. It was the truth that would rewrite his entire life. If this story is already hitting close to home for you, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. We talk about real things here, the hard things, and the hope that comes after. The heavy oak door of the Albright Group Home for Boys clicked shut behind me, the sound as final as a gavel. For a decade, that sound had meant curfew, safety, confinement. Now, it meant I was done, finished, expired. My 18th birthday had been 3 days ago, a quiet affair with a sheet cake someone had misspelled my name on. "Happy birthday, Leo," it read, which was close enough. My name is Lee. I stood on the cracked concrete steps, the February air sharp and damp in my lungs. It smelled like bus exhaust and the cold, wet dirt of the sad little flower beds lining the walk. Inside the duffel bag slung over my shoulder was everything the state decided I owned. 3 pairs of jeans, 5 t-shirts, a toothbrush, and a stack of paperwork that officially declared me an adult, free to sink or swim on my own. Miss Albright, my caseworker for the last 2 years, had walked me to the door. She was a woman made of sharp angles and tired efficiency, but her eyes held a flicker of something I couldn't quite name. Pity, maybe, or just the bone-deep weariness of seeing another kid spit out by the system she served. She'd pressed a thick manila envelope into my hand, along with my final discharge papers. "This came for you, Lee," she'd said, her voice unusually soft. "From your grandmother's estate attorney. It was to be held until your 18th. I stared at the envelope. My grandmother. The words felt foreign, like a language I'd once known but had long since forgotten. I had only hazy, fragmented memories of her. The scent of cinnamon and soil, the rough texture of her hands, a low, humming voice. Then, nothing. She'd disappeared from my life around the same time I'd entered the system, a coincidence I'd long ago hardened into the truth of abandonment. She left me. It was the cornerstone of the story I told myself about myself. "My grandmother's dead," I said, the words flat and empty. "Yes," Ms. Albright confirmed, not unkindly. "A while now. But she left you something." She adjusted her glasses, a nervous tick. "Look, Lee, there's a bus ticket in there, and a key, and a letter from a real estate company. An offer. It might be your best bet, a clean start." She'd squeezed my shoulder, a rare moment of physical contact that felt both comforting and deeply awkward. "The world is bigger than this place. Try to remember that." And then the door clicked shut. So there I was, an adult, holding an envelope that felt heavier than my duffel bag. The city bus hissed to a stop at the corner, its brakes groaning like a tired beast. I didn't know where I was going, not really. But I knew I was leaving. I had to. Staying here, in the shadow of the home, felt like drowning in slow motion. I walked to the bus stop, the envelope a lead weight in my hand. I could feel the key inside, a hard, unyielding shape against the soft paper. A key to what? A past I didn't understand, and a future I couldn't imagine. The bus ride was a blur of gray slush and grimy windows. I found a seat in the back, pulling my knees to my chest and trying to make myself as small as possible. A habit learned over years of sharing space with bigger, louder boys. I finally tore open the envelope. Inside, just as she'd said, was a one-way bus ticket to a town I'd never heard of, Havenwood. It was a 6-hour ride north. There was also a heavy, old-fashioned brass key attached to a simple metal ring. A deed to a plot of land. 5 acres, it said, and a crisp, corporate-looking letter from a company called Apex Development Group. I scanned the letter. They were offering to buy the property. The number made my breath catch in my throat. $50,000. To me, it might as well have been $1 million. It was more money than I had ever imagined holding. It was enough to disappear, to get a cheap apartment somewhere, find a job, and build a wall of anonymity between me and the world that had raised me. It was the easy way out, the clean start Ms. Albright had mentioned. I folded the letter and tucked it back into the envelope. $50,000 for a place I'd never seen, left by a woman who had abandoned me. It felt like a transaction, a final payment for a debt I hadn't known was owed. The bus rumbled on, leaving the city's concrete canyons behind, transitioning to sprawling suburbs, and then, finally, to the stark, empty beauty of the winter countryside. Fields of dormant corn, dusted with snow, stretched out under a pale, watery sun. The world got quieter, emptier, bigger, just like she'd said. For the first time, a feeling other than numb survival flickered inside me. It was a tiny, fragile thing, sharp and unsettling. It felt a little like fear, but it was threaded with something else. Curiosity. I had to see it. I had to stand on this piece of land, turn this key in whatever lock it fit, and understand what I was selling. I couldn't just sign a paper and trade a ghost for a check. I owed myself that much. I owed the boy who'd spent a decade staring out of dormitory windows, wondering why he was alone, at least that. The bus finally pulled into Havenwood just as the sun was setting, painting the bruised purple sky with strokes of orange and pink. The town was little more than a wide spot in the road. A gas station, a diner with a flickering neon sign, a general store, and a handful of houses. The air was different here. It was clean and cold, smelling of pine and wood smoke. It smelled like silence. I asked the bus driver, a burly man with a kind face, if he knew where Briarwood Lane was. He grunted. About 3 miles out of town, past the old sawmill. You got a ride? I shook my head. He sighed, then gestured with his thumb. Get your bag. I'm heading that way to get home. I'll drop you at the turnoff. The kindness of a stranger felt jarring. In the system, you learned to be wary of kindness. It always came with a price. But I was tired, and the sky was getting dark, so I just nodded and said, "Thanks." His truck rattled down a gravel road, headlights cutting a tunnel through the encroaching woods. He dropped me at a fork, where a faded, moss-covered sign read, Briarwood Lane. "This is it," he said, looking at me with a questioning eye. "You sure you got the right place? Ain't much out here." "I'm sure," I lied. He shrugged and drove off, his red taillights disappearing into the trees, leaving me in an immense, profound quiet. The only sounds were the wind whispering through the pines and the frantic beating of my own heart. I started walking. The road was more of a dirt track, rutted and muddy. After about half a mile, I saw it. Set back from the road in the middle of a clearing was a long, curved metal building, a Quonset hut. Its corrugated steel skin was rusted in patches, the color of dried blood against the white snow. It looked less like a building and more like something that had fallen from the sky a long time ago and been forgotten. This was it. This was my inheritance, my $50,000 problem. I stood there for a long time, the cold seeping into my bones, just looking at it. It was ugly and strange and utterly alone. And in that moment, I felt a bizarre kinship with the rusty metal arch. I walked across the snow-covered field, my boots crunching in the stillness. The brass key felt cold and real in my hand. There was a single door on the front, painted a faded green, with a small, grimy window. The lock was old and stiff, but the key slid in. It took some jiggling, a push of my shoulder against the door, and then with a loud groan of protest, the lock turned. The door swung inward, opening into a cavern of cold, dusty darkness. I stepped inside, and the world outside fell away. The air inside the Quonset was heavy and still, thick with the smell of dust, damp earth, and something else. Something faintly sweet, like dried flowers. It was a single, vast, open space, the curved ceiling soaring 20 feet above my head. A few shafts of moonlight cut through grimy skylights, illuminating swirling dust motes and casting long, distorted shadows. Along one wall were shelves filled with old paint cans and mason jars. A workbench stood against the back wall, covered in tools that were neatly arranged but coated in a thick layer of grime. In the center of the concrete floor sat a pot-bellied stove, a stack of firewood beside it, and 2 worn armchairs. It was a workshop, a garage, a storage shed. It wasn't a home. My heart sank. What had I expected? A cozy cottage? This was just a metal shell on a patch of dirt. The developer's $50,000 suddenly felt less like a transaction and more like a rescue. I could take the money and never think about this strange, sad place again. I ran a hand along the dusty workbench, my fingers leaving a clean streak. Underneath a pile of old canvases, my hand brushed against something hard and wooden. I pulled it out. It was a small, intricately carved wooden box, about the size of a shoebox. It wasn't dusty like everything else. It was clean, as if it had been wiped down recently, or perhaps just placed here. There was no lock, just a simple brass latch. My fingers trembled as I lifted it. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a stack of envelopes tied with a simple blue ribbon. They were addressed to me. "For Lee," the top one read, in a spidery, elegant script. My breath caught. I sat down in one of the dusty armchairs, the cold of the room forgotten. The chill I felt now was something deeper, something that came from within. I untied the ribbon. There were maybe a dozen letters, each one in a sealed envelope. I picked up the one on top. It was thicker than the others. I tore it open, my hands clumsy. The paper inside was thin and crackled as I unfolded it. The same handwriting covered the page. "My dearest Lee," it began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are a man. I am so sorry. Those are the words I need to say first. I am sorry for everything. I imagine you have grown up thinking I abandoned you, that I didn't love you. Nothing could be further from the truth. Every choice I made to protect you." I had to stop reading. The words blurred, and a hot, tight knot formed in my chest. Protect me? I'd spent my entire childhood feeling like the most unprotected person on earth. I'd learned to fight, to hide, to make myself invisible. I'd learned that love was conditional, and family was a fantasy. This letter felt like a lie, a comfortable story told too late to matter. But I kept reading. I had to. "Your father," she wrote, and my blood ran cold. I knew almost nothing about him. His name wasn't on my birth certificate. He was a blank space, a void. "He was not a good man, Lee. He was charming, and I was young, and I believed his stories. But his charm was a mask for something dark and violent. He was involved with dangerous people, owed them money he didn't have. When you were born, that danger didn't go away. It escalated. It began to circle you. The letter went on to describe a world I couldn't comprehend. Threats, strange cars parked on our street, phone calls in the middle of the night. She wrote about the day your father disappeared, leaving behind nothing but a mountain of debt to people who didn't forgive or forget. They came looking for him, the letter said, and when they couldn't find him, they came looking for what he'd left behind. They came for me, for you. They made it clear that the debt was now ours. I sold everything I had, but it wasn't enough. They wanted more. They wanted this land. I looked around the vast, empty Quonset. This land. It had always been about the land. This property has been in our family for 100 years, she continued. It was my grandfather's. It was the only thing of value we had left. I couldn't let them take it. More than that, I couldn't let them have you. They saw you as leverage, as a way to control me. I knew, with a certainty that terrified me, that as long as you were with me, you would never be safe. They would use you to break me. I could barely breathe. The neat, orderly story of my life, the story of abandonment, was cracking, splintering into 1,000 pieces. So I did the only thing I could think of. I made you disappear. I put you into the state's care, under a slightly different name, in a different county. I covered my tracks. I told the authorities I was an unfit mother, that I had problems that made me unable to care for you. I let them think the worst of me. It was the price of your safety. Every social worker, every judge, every foster parent who ever looked at your file saw the story of a mother who walked away. It broke my heart every single day, but it kept you alive. It kept you hidden while I dealt with the mess your father left. My hands were shaking so badly I could hardly hold the page. I cried. Not loud, sobbing tears, but silent, hot tears that tracked through the dust on my cheeks. I cried for the little boy who believed he was worthless. I cried for the teenager who had built a shell around himself so thick that nothing could get in. And I cried for her, for the grandmother I'd hated, who had been fighting a war for me that I never knew existed. I spent the next 10 years paying them off, the letter went on. I worked 3 jobs. I lived in a tiny apartment. I sold my car. I funneled every spare penny to them, slowly, painfully buying back your safety. And I protected this land. I put it in a trust for you that they couldn't touch, payable on your 18th birthday. I built this Quonset with my own hands, with help from a few old friends. I imagined it as a place for you, a workshop, a studio, a starting point, a place that was yours, that no one could ever take from you, a foundation. I looked up, through the grimy skylights, at the star-dusted sky. A foundation. She had given me a foundation, and I was about to sell it for 50,000 pieces of silver. The shame was a physical thing, a bitter taste in my mouth. The final paragraph of the letter was almost illegible, the ink smudged as if by tears. There is a developer who wants this land badly. They've been circling for years. They will make you a generous offer the moment you turn 18. It will be tempting, Lee. It will look like an easy escape. You can take it, and no one would blame you. But I hope you don't. I hope you see this place not for what it is, a rusty metal shed on a patch of weeds, but for what it represents. It is a promise. It is proof that you were never, not for 1 second, abandoned. You were protected. You were loved. The choice is yours, my boy. It always was. All my love, Grandma Ilara. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. The box on my lap held the rest of her story, but I couldn't read them. Not yet. This first one was too much. It was a universe of new information, a complete reordering of my reality. I wasn't the boy who was thrown away. I was the boy who was saved. I sat in that cold, dark hut for hours, the weight of her sacrifice pressing down on me. The $50,000 offer from Apex Development felt like a sacrilege now, an insult to her memory. They weren't just offering to buy 5 acres of dirt. They were offering to buy her struggle, her pain, her love, and erase it all for a tidy profit. The anger came slowly, a low burn that started in my gut and spread through my veins. Anger at my father for his weakness. Anger at the faceless people who had terrorized her. Anger at the system that had made it so easy for her to give me up and so hard for her to get me back. And a deep, profound anger at myself for being so ready to walk away. Morning came, gray and cold. My body was stiff from sleeping in the armchair. My first night of freedom had been spent in a dusty metal box, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I was somewhere I belonged. I found a pump outside for water and splashed my face, the icy shock of it a welcome jolt. I spent the day exploring. I walked the perimeter of the 5 acres, pushing through snow-laden pine branches and brittle frozen weeds. The land sloped down to a small frozen creek at the back. It was quiet and beautiful, and mine. Back in the Quonset, I started to clean. It was a monumental task. I swept away years of dust and grime, wiped down the workbench, organized the tools. Each movement was methodical, deliberate. I was taking possession of the space, not just legally, but physically, emotionally. With every stroke of the broom, I was sweeping away the old story and making room for the new one. As I worked, I thought about her. Ilara. I said her name out loud. It felt good. I imagined her here, hammering nails, lifting trusses, her hands covered in grease and sawdust. I imagined her thinking of me with every board she cut. This wasn't just a building, it was a prayer. It was a testament. My phone, a cheap burner I'd bought with my last $100 of state-issued pocket money, rang in the late afternoon. The number was unfamiliar. I answered. "Is this Lee?" a slick, professional voice asked. "Speaking," I said, my voice hoarse. "This is Mark Colton from Apex Development Group. We sent you a letter regarding the Briarwood Lane property. I trust you received our offer?" "I got it," I said, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. "Excellent. It's a very strong offer, as I'm sure you'll agree. $50,000, cash. We cover all closing costs. We can have the paperwork drawn up by the end of the week. It's a chance for you to move on, get a real head start in life." Move on. The phrase hung in the air. He thought he was offering me a future. He had no idea he was asking me to sell my past, my present, and the only real connection I had to the one person who had ever truly fought for me. This was the moment, the choice, right here, right now. It was the first real choice I'd ever made as an adult. Everything before this had been about survival, about navigating the rules of a system I hadn't chosen. This was different. This was about identity. Who was I going to be? The boy who took the easy money and ran, or the man who stayed and built something on the foundation his grandmother had laid? It was terrifying. The $50,000 represented safety, warmth, food, a life without struggle. Staying here meant what? Hardship, loneliness, a fight I didn't know if I could win. But as I stood there in the middle of the dusty, half-cleaned Quonset, surrounded by the evidence of her love, I knew there was no real choice at all. "The property isn't for sale," I said. My voice was steady. It sounded stronger than I felt. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I don't think you understand, son," Mark Colton said, his voice losing its friendly edge, replaced by a patronizing tone. "This is a one-time offer. That land is worthless to anyone but us. It's not zoned for residential. That structure isn't up to code. You'll be buried in property taxes and fines before you can even blink. Take the money. It's the smart play." "No," I said again. "It's not for sale." "You're making a big mistake, kid." He hung up. I stood in the silence, the phone still pressed to my ear. A big mistake. Maybe he was right, but it felt like the first right thing I had ever done. The weight of the decision settled on me, but it wasn't a crushing weight. It was a solid, anchoring one. I had chosen the harder path. I had chosen her. Now I had to figure out how to survive it. And that's where I want to pause for a second. If you've ever been at a crossroads like that, where the easy path felt wrong and the right path felt impossible, I see you. It's a lonely place to be. If this story is resonating with you, if you've ever had to fight for what you believe in, let me know in the comments. Tell me about your Quonset hut, your impossible choice. This community is for people who get it, who've been through the fire. Your story matters here. So, what do you do when you've chosen to fight, but you have no weapons? You start with what you have. I had a rusty metal shell, a set of old tools, a wood stove, and 5 acres of land. I had about $90 in my pocket. First things first, I needed to survive the winter. I spent a day chopping the firewood stacked by the stove. The rhythmic work was a balm, the clean, sharp scent of pine filling the air. I found a small stash of canned goods on one of the shelves: beans, soup, peaches, and a cast iron pan. Emergency supplies. Her emergency supplies. For me. Every discovery was a fresh wave of grief and gratitude. I read another letter that night by the light of the fire in the pot-bellied stove. This one was about the Quonset itself. "They say a man's home is his castle," she wrote. "This is more of a bunker, I suppose, but it's strong. The curved design means the snow load just slides right off. It can withstand winds that would peel the roof off a normal house. It's a survivor, Lee, like you." She'd included hand-drawn sketches and plans. She designed it with a loft in mind, a second level for sleeping, to free up the main floor for living and working. "You need to build up," she wrote. "Claim the vertical space. It will make it feel like a home." Build up. The words resonated deep inside me. That's what I needed to do. Not just physically, but in every way. I spent the next few weeks in a blur of hard physical labor. I got a job bussing tables at the diner in town, walking the 3 miles there and back every day. It was grueling work for minimum wage, but every dollar was a victory. I bought insulation, lumber, nails. I learned from old books I found in the town's tiny library and from watching videos on my phone when I could get a signal. The townspeople watched me with a quiet curiosity. They were reserved, wary of outsiders. But slowly, things started to shift. Mr. Henderson, the owner of the hardware store, started giving me discounts on materials. "Call it a local's price," he'd grumble, not meeting my eye. The bus driver who'd given me a ride, whose name I learned was Sal, would sometimes drop off a bag of groceries on his way home. "Wife made too much," he'd say with a shrug. They weren't offering pity. It was a quiet, gruff form of acceptance. They were watching me work, watching me stay, and they were giving me a chance. The biggest project was the second level. Building it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I had to learn how to frame walls, how to run basic wiring from a generator I'd bought, how to cut and fit floorboards. I made 1,000 mistakes. I cut boards too short, hit my thumb with a hammer more times than I could count, and nearly fell off the ladder twice. There were days I wanted to give up, when the cold was so deep in my bones I thought I'd never be warm again. When my loneliness felt as vast and empty as the Quonset itself. On those days, I would read another one of her letters. They became my fuel. In them, I learned about her life, her dreams of being an artist, her love of gardening. I learned about my mother, who had died when I was a toddler, a tragedy that had sent my father spiraling. I was piecing together not just her story, but my own. I wasn't a blank slate, an orphan of the state. I had roots. They were tangled and broken, but they were there. I was the grandson of Elara, a woman who could build a house with her bare hands and fight off monsters with sheer force of will. One letter contained a small, folded piece of paper. It was a plat map of the property. On it, she had circled a specific spot near the creek. Beside it, she'd written a single word: foundation. I thought she was being metaphorical again. But the next day, I took a shovel and went to the spot. The ground was frozen solid, but I was determined. I hacked at the dirt and ice for an hour until my shovel hit something hard. It wasn't rock. It was a metal box, a small, watertight safe. My heart hammered against my ribs. I dug it out and carried it back to the hut. It was heavy. There was a combination lock. I stared at it, my mind racing. A combination? A birthday? An anniversary? Then I remembered a line from one of her letters, one I hadn't understood at the time. Don't forget the day you became your own man. My 18th birthday. I tried the numbers. The lock clicked open. I lifted the heavy lid. Inside, stacked in neat vacuum-sealed bundles, was cash. A lot of it. I counted it, my hands shaking. It was just over $20,000. Underneath the money was a final letter. My dearest Lee, this is the last of it, the money I saved for your future. I didn't want to give it to you right away. A person has to know what they're fighting for before they're handed the weapons to win. You had to choose this place. You had to choose to stay. If you're reading this, it means you did. This money isn't a handout. It's an investment. It's for the property taxes Mr. Colton from Apex was so worried about. It's for a proper well. It's for windows that don't leak. It's for you to build your life, not just a loft. Use it wisely. Make this place a home. Make it a haven. Live a good life, Lee. That's all I ever wanted. That will be my victory. I sat on the floor, the money and the letter in my lap, and I finally understood the full scope of her plan. She hadn't just left me a property. She'd left me a test of character. She'd given me a hard choice to see who I would become, and she had trusted me to make the right one. She had armed me not just with the means to survive, but with the reason to. The money changed things. It didn't make life easy, but it made it possible. I paid the back taxes at the county office, the clerk looking at me with new respect. I hired a crew to drill a proper well. I bought new, energy-efficient windows and a door that sealed tight against the wind. The Quonset started to transform. With the second level finished, it was no longer just a cavernous shed. The loft became my bedroom, a cozy, wood-paneled space under the curved roof. I put a big window at one end, and from my bed, I could look out over the trees and see the stars. It was the first room that had ever been truly mine. Downstairs, I built a small, functional kitchen along one wall and a proper bathroom. The main area became a living space, filled with second-hand furniture I bought in town and repaired on her old workbench. The pot-bellied stove was the heart of the home, radiating warmth that was more than just physical. The hut was no longer a symbol of her sacrifice. It was becoming a vessel for my future. One day, Mark Colton from Apex Development showed up in person. He pulled up in a shiny black SUV, his expensive suit looking ridiculous against the backdrop of my muddy yard. He got out and looked at the transformed Quonset, at the new windows and the plume of smoke rising from the chimney. His expression was a mixture of surprise and annoyance. "I'll give you $75,000, he said without any preamble. "Final offer." I was standing on the porch I'd just finished building, a hammer in my hand. I looked at him, then at the home I had built. I thought of Alara. I thought of the boy who had stepped off the bus with nothing but a key and a story of being unwanted. "You don't have enough money to buy this place," I said, and for the first time, I smiled. It felt real. He stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head, got back in his car, and drove away. I never heard from him again. Life settled into a rhythm. Work at the diner, work on the house. I started a garden in the spring, in the same spot she had marked on another of her maps. I planted tomatoes, squash, and beans, my hands in the same soil she had once tended. I felt her presence everywhere, not as a ghost, but as a quiet, steady strength. I wasn't lonely anymore. I was alone, but it was a different kind of alone. It was a peaceful solitude, not a painful isolation. The people in town started to treat me as one of their own. Sal would invite me over for dinner sometimes. Mr. Henderson asked for my help building a new shed behind his store. I was becoming part of the fabric of this place, this Havenwood. It had lived up to its name. It had become my haven. The Quonset hut, my strange, beautiful, rusty home, saved me. But it wasn't the metal or the wood that did it. It was the choice to stay. It was the work. It was the discovery that my life wasn't a story of abandonment, but a story of profound, fierce, and sacrificial love. My grandmother gave me more than a piece of land. She gave me back my past, and in doing so, she gave me a future. She taught me that home isn't a place you are given, it's a place you build. It's the foundation you lay, the walls you raise, the roof you put over your own head. It's the choice to fight for something, to put down roots in a place and say, "This is mine. I belong here." I still have one of her letters that I haven't read. I'm saving it. I'll read it on the day I feel my work here is truly done, though I suspect that day will never come. There's always more to build, more to grow. The second level is finished, but now I'm thinking about an extension, a greenhouse maybe. The work is the point. The building, the creating, the becoming. That's the life she wanted for me. And it's the life I've chosen. My story started with a door closing, leaving me on the outside of everything I'd ever known. But it led me to another door, a faded green one, on the front of a rusty metal hut. Opening that door didn't just let me into a building, it let me into my own life. And that's a lesson that I think is worth sharing. Home, family, a second chance. These things can feel impossible when you're starting from scratch, when you feel like the world has kicked you to the curb. But sometimes, the most broken down places hold the most beautiful truths. Sometimes, the greatest inheritance isn't money. It's a foundation and a choice. If you've made it to the end of my story, thank you. It means a lot to share this with you. This channel is a place for stories like this, for people who are building their own lives out of the pieces they were left with. If you believe in the power of a second chance, if you believe that home is something we build, then I hope you'll subscribe and become part of this community. And I want to ask you to do one more thing. In the comments below, tell me about something you've built. It doesn't have to be a house. Maybe you built a relationship, a career, a newfound confidence. What was your Quonset hut? What foundation did you discover that changed everything for you? I'll be reading every one, because your story matters. We all have something to build. Let's do it together.